The fluorescent lights flickered overhead as Maya Chen adjusted her thick-rimmed glasses, the frames slightly askew from the morning rush. She pressed her back against the cold metal of locker 247, watching the chaos of Westfield Academy's main hallway unfold before her, like a carefully choreographed dance of teenage hierarchy. Students moved in predictable patterns, the athletes commanding the center walkway, the theater kids clustering near the bulletin boards, and the academic elite gliding seamlessly between groups with an air of untouchable confidence. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. What Maya didn't expect was the sudden grip of calloused fingers wrapping around her glasses, yanking them from her face with such force that her nose bridge stung from the impact. The world immediately dissolved into a blur of moving shapes and muffled colors, leaving her vulnerable and disoriented in the most public space imaginable. Well, what do we have here? The voice belonged to Derek Morrison, a senior whose reputation for cruelty had reached legendary status among the underclassmen. His laughter echoed off the tiled walls as he held Maya's glasses high above his head, the metal frames catching the harsh overhead lighting. Looks like 4 eyes here can't see without her little helpers. Maya's heart hammered against her ribcage as she reached desperately toward the blurred figure holding her lifeline to visual clarity. Without her glasses, faces became indistinct smudges. Hallway signs turned into meaningless blobs, and the entire world transformed into a threatening maze of shadows and uncertainty. She had worn glasses since 3rd grade, and the vulnerability of being without them in a hostile environment sent waves of panic coursing through her nervous system. The crowd that had begun to gather seemed to sense the entertainment value of the situation, their murmurs creating a low hum of anticipation that made Maya's skin crawl. She could feel their eyes on her, could hear the subtle shift in conversation as phones emerged from pockets and backpacks, ready to capture whatever humiliation was about to unfold. "Please," Maya whispered, her voice barely audible above the ambient noise of the hallway. "I need those to see." Derek's response was to toss the glasses to his friend Marcus, who caught them with the casual ease of someone accustomed to playing catch with other people's possessions. The gesture sent a clear message. This wasn't going to end quickly or quietly. Maya turned toward Marcus's general direction, her movements uncertain and clumsy without the benefit of clear vision. "Come and get them, China girl," Marcus called out, using a phrase that made Maya's stomach clench with a familiar mixture of anger and resignation. She had heard variations of that particular ignorance throughout her life, had developed a thick skin for casual racism disguised as playground humor, but the combination of the slur with her current helplessness created a perfect storm of humiliation. The hallway seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction as Maya took a tentative step forward, her hands extended cautiously to avoid collision with lockers, trash cans, or other students. The laughter around her grew louder, more pointed, as her obvious disorientation provided entertainment for an audience that had momentarily forgotten they might someday find themselves in an equally vulnerable position. What none of them realized, what Derek and Marcus couldn't possibly have known as they continued their cruel game of keep-away, was that Maya Chen carried within her a skill set that had been forged through years of disciplined training, countless hours of practice, and a philosophy that emphasized respect, humility, and the protection of those who couldn't protect themselves. Her sensei, Master Tanaka, had drilled into her the importance of using martial arts only as a last resort, only when all other options had been exhausted, and only in defense of herself or others who couldn't defend themselves. But as Derek grabbed her glasses from Marcus and held them tantalizingly close to her face before snatching them away again, as the laughter of the crowd reached a crescendo that seemed to echo from every corner of the hallway, Maya felt something deep inside her chest begin to stir. It wasn't anger, exactly, though anger was certainly part of it. It was something more fundamental, more primal, a recognition that sometimes the only way to stop a predator was to show them that their intended prey had teeth. Maya Chen had arrived at Westfield Academy 3 days earlier, with the kind of quiet determination that often goes unnoticed in the chaotic ecosystem of a large suburban high school. Her family had relocated from Portland to the small town of Millbrook when her father's engineering firm offered him a promotion that came with a substantial salary increase and the promise of a more stable future. The move had been presented as an opportunity, a chance for fresh starts and new beginnings, but Maya understood the underlying financial pressures that had made the decision necessary rather than optional. Westfield Academy prided itself on academic excellence and college preparatory programs, boasting impressive statistics about SAT scores and university acceptances that decorated the main hallway in professionally printed banners. The school served a community where parents drove luxury SUVs to soccer practice, and college counseling sessions began in freshman year, where students discussed summer internships at their parents' companies with the casual ease of those born into privilege. Maya's family didn't fit neatly into this demographic. Her father worked long hours at his new position, still proving himself worthy of the opportunity he'd been given, while her mother had taken a job at the local library to help supplement their income and establish herself in the community. They lived in a modest rental house on the outskirts of the school district, a fact that Maya kept to herself as she navigated the social complexities of her new environment. The academic portion of her transition had been relatively smooth. Maya possessed the kind of intellectual curiosity and disciplined study habits that teachers appreciated, and her previous school had prepared her well for the rigorous coursework that Westfield Academy demanded. She had quietly excelled in her AP chemistry class, had impressed her English teacher with an insightful analysis of contemporary literature, and had solved complex calculus problems with an efficiency that caught the attention of Mr. Rodriguez, the head of the mathematics department. But academic success, Maya had learned through previous relocations, didn't automatically translate into social acceptance. High school hierarchies operated according to unwritten rules that had little to do with intelligence or character, and breaking into established social circles required a combination of timing, luck, and social skills that Maya had never quite mastered. She had spent her first week observing, learning the rhythms and patterns of her new environment. She noted which tables in the cafeteria belonged to which groups, which hallways experienced the heaviest traffic between classes, and which teachers maintained strict policies about tardiness versus those who showed more flexibility. Maya had always been a careful observer of human behavior, a skill that had served her well in previous schools and would prove invaluable in understanding the complex social dynamics of Westfield Academy. Derek Morrison had first noticed Maya during second period AP history, where she had answered a particularly challenging question about the economic factors that contributed to the Great Depression. Her response had been thorough, well-researched, and delivered with the kind of quiet confidence that sometimes irritated students who were accustomed to being the smartest person in the room. Derek, whose own academic performance relied more on his family's generous donations to the school than on his intellectual capabilities, had felt a flicker of resentment at being overshadowed by someone he considered an outsider. The resentment had festered over the following days as Maya continued to excel academically while maintaining her policy of social invisibility. Derek was accustomed to a certain level of deference from underclassmen and newcomers, an acknowledgement of his position in the school's unofficial hierarchy. Maya's apparent indifference to his status, her focus on her studies rather than on gaining his approval, represented a challenge to an authority structure that Derek had spent 4 years establishing. Marcus Webb, Derek's closest friend and most reliable accomplice, shared his leader's frustration with the new girl, who seemed immune to their usual methods of establishing dominance. Marcus had perfected the art of psychological intimidation through years of practice, developing an instinct for identifying students' vulnerabilities and exploiting them for entertainment. Maya's quiet demeanor and obvious intelligence made her an appealing target, but her apparent self-sufficiency and lack of obvious insecurities presented an interesting challenge. The decision to target Maya's glasses had been spontaneous, the result of Derek noticing how she constantly adjusted them throughout their shared morning classes. The glasses were clearly essential to her daily functioning, making them the perfect tool for creating the kind of public humiliation that Derek enjoyed inflicting on students who failed to show proper respect for his position. What Derek and Marcus didn't know, what they couldn't have discovered through casual observation or hallway gossip, was that Maya Chen had been practicing judo since she was 7 years old. Her introduction to martial arts had come through her grandfather, who had immigrated to the United States in the 1960s and had maintained his connection to traditional Japanese culture through decades of dedicated practice. Master Chen, as he was known at the local dojo, had insisted that his granddaughter learn not just the physical techniques of judo, but also the philosophical foundations that governed when and how those techniques should be applied. Maya's training had been comprehensive and demanding. She had learned to fall properly, absorbing impact through precise body positioning rather than brute force. She had mastered the art of using an opponent's momentum against them, redirecting their energy in ways that seemed almost effortless to observers who didn't understand the years of practice required to make such movements appear natural. Most importantly, she had internalized the concept of judo as a way of life, rather than simply a collection of fighting techniques. Her sensei, Master Tanaka, had taken over her training when her grandfather's age made regular practice impossible. Master Tanaka ran his dojo according to traditional principles that emphasized respect, discipline, and the development of character alongside physical skills. Students were required to bow before entering the practice area, to address their instructor and senior students with appropriate honorifics, and to demonstrate control and restraint in all their interactions. Maya had earned her black belt the previous year, achievement that represented not just technical proficiency but also a deep understanding of judo's underlying philosophy. The promotion ceremony had been attended by her entire family, including her grandfather, who had watched with tears in his eyes as his granddaughter received recognition for years of dedicated effort. The black belt represented more than personal accomplishment. It was a symbol of responsibility, a commitment to using her skills wisely and protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. The philosophy of judo extended far beyond physical combat techniques. Students learned about the concept of mutual welfare and benefit, the idea that true strength came from helping others achieve their potential, rather than dominating them through force. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. They studied the principle of minimum effort for maximum efficiency, learning to accomplish their goals through intelligence and technique rather than raw power. Most importantly, they internalized the understanding that martial arts should never be used for aggression or intimidation, but only in defense of themselves or others who faced genuine threat. Maya's dedication to these principles had been tested on multiple occasions throughout her martial arts journey. She had witnessed bullying situations where her skills could have quickly resolved conflicts in her favor, but had chosen instead to seek adult intervention or to diffuse situations through verbal communication. She had been mocked by classmates who discovered her martial arts background, but never saw evidence of her capabilities, leading some to assume that she was all talk and no action. The restraint required to maintain these principles had become second nature to Maya, integrated into her personality so thoroughly that most people saw only her quiet, studious demeanor. Her teachers appreciated her as a model student who never caused trouble or disrupted classroom dynamics. Her classmates generally ignored her, viewing her as someone who existed on the periphery of their social universe without impacting their daily experiences. But restraint, Maya had learned, was not the same as weakness. Her grandfather had taught her that true strength often required the discipline to avoid using one's capabilities, but that there came moments when action became not just justified but morally necessary. The challenge was recognizing when such moments arrived, when all other options had been exhausted, and when the potential consequences of inaction outweighed the risks of intervention. As Derek Morrison continued his cruel game with her glasses, passing them back and forth with Marcus while the gathered crowd provided an appreciative audience for their entertainment, Maya felt herself approaching one of those decisive moments. She had tried asking politely for the return of her property. She had attempted to ignore the racial slurs and personal insults that accompanied the theft. She had looked hopefully toward the few adults visible in the distance, searching for intervention that seemed unlikely to arrive in time to prevent further escalation. The hallway had transformed into an arena where social dynamics played out with the brutal clarity of a nature documentary. Students formed concentric circles around the conflict, their phones capturing every moment of Maya's humiliation for later sharing on social media platforms. The entertainment value of watching someone struggle with an obvious disability seemed to override any empathetic concerns about the cruelty they were witnessing. Maya recognized the familiar pattern of group psychology that allowed ordinary people to participate in or passively observe cruelty that they would never initiate individually. The crowd provided anonymity and diffusion of responsibility, allowing each participant to tell themselves that they weren't really involved, that they were merely witnesses to events beyond their control. The phones created additional distance, transforming a real person's suffering into content to be consumed and shared. Derek seemed to feed off the crowd's energy, his performance becoming more elaborate as he realized the attention he was commanding. He began making exaggerated gestures with Maya's glasses, pretending to clean them with his shirt before holding them up to his own eyes and making faces that sent ripples of laughter through the assembled audience. The humor was cruel and obvious, the kind of cheap entertainment that required no wit or creativity, only a willingness to cause pain for the amusement of others. Marcus contributed his own commentary, describing Maya's appearance without her glasses in terms that were both inaccurate and deliberately hurtful. His observations focused on stereotypes and assumptions about her ethnicity, her family's economic status, and her perceived social inadequacies. The words were chosen specifically to wound, to reduce a complex human being to a collection of supposedly amusing defects. Maya felt her vision blurred not just from the absence of her glasses, but from tears of frustration that she refused to let fall. Crying would only provide additional entertainment for the crowd, would confirm their assumption that she was weak and helpless, unable to defend herself against even the most basic forms of aggression. She blinked rapidly, forcing her vision to clear as much as possible, and took a deep breath that filled her lungs completely and helped center her awareness. The breathing technique was one of the first things she had learned in judo, a method for maintaining calm focus even under extreme stress. Master Tanaka had taught his students that physical techniques were useless without proper mental preparation, that the mind needed to remain clear and responsive regardless of external circumstances. Maya felt her heartbeat slow slightly as the breathing exercise activated her parasympathetic nervous system, countering the fight-or-flight response that had been flooding her body with adrenaline. She assessed her surroundings with the systematic approach that her training had ingrained. The hallway was approximately 12 feet wide, with lockers lining both sides and creating natural boundaries for any physical confrontation. The crowd formed a rough circle with a diameter of about 8 feet, leaving her adequate space for movement, but limiting her options for retreat. Derek stood approximately 4 feet directly in front of her, while Marcus positioned himself at roughly a 45-degree angle to her left, close enough to intervene if necessary but far enough away to avoid accidental contact. Both boys were significantly larger than Maya, with Derek standing at least 6 inches taller and possessing the kind of athletic build that came from years of football practice and weight training. Marcus was slightly shorter but broader, his wrestling background evident in his compact, powerful frame and the confident way he carried himself in physical confrontations. Under normal circumstances, their size and strength advantages would have made them formidable opponents for someone of Maya's stature. But circumstances were far from normal. Derek and Marcus were operating under assumptions about Maya's capabilities that were not just incorrect but dangerously misleading. They saw a small, quiet girl who wore glasses and focused on her studies, someone who represented an easy target for their psychological warfare. They had no reason to suspect that she possessed years of training in one of the world's most effective martial arts, or that her apparent helplessness was largely an illusion created by her commitment to avoiding unnecessary conflict. Maya made one final attempt at peaceful resolution, though she suspected that the situation had progressed beyond the point where verbal communication would prove effective. "Please give me my glasses back," she said, her voice carrying more authority than it had earlier, though she kept her tone respectful and non-threatening. "I need them to see, and I haven't done anything to you." Derek's response was to laugh more loudly and make an exaggerated show of examining the glasses as if they were some sort of fascinating scientific specimen. "Oh, she needs them to see," he announced to the crowd, his voice dripping with mock sympathy. "Well, maybe if you asked nicely, we might consider giving them back. But you haven't even said please properly." The demand for additional humiliation confirmed what Maya had already suspected, that Derek's goal wasn't simply to retrieve some imagined slight or to establish his dominance over a newcomer. His objective was to create a prolonged spectacle of degradation, to force her to grovel and beg in front of an audience that would remember and discuss her humiliation for weeks to come. The glasses were merely a tool for achieving psychological dominance, a means of demonstrating his power to hurt someone who couldn't effectively fight back. Maya felt the last of her restraint beginning to dissolve, as she recognized the futility of attempting to reason with someone whose primary motivation was causing pain. Master Tanaka had taught his students to recognize the difference between conflicts that could be resolved through communication and those that required physical intervention. The key indicators were clear. Derek had shown no willingness to engage in good faith negotiation, had escalated his aggression despite her attempts at peaceful resolution, and was actively seeking to cause her emotional and social harm. More importantly, Maya realized that her situation extended beyond personal humiliation. Every student in the hallway was receiving a lesson about power dynamics, about who deserved respect and who could be victimized with impunity. Her response to Derek's aggression would send a message that extended far beyond her individual circumstances, potentially affecting how other students were treated in similar situations. She thought about the younger students who might be watching, particularly those who shared her experience as outsiders or members of minority groups. They were learning whether people like them were expected to accept mistreatment as the price of attending schools like Westfield Academy, whether quiet competence was valued less than social aggression, and whether adults could be counted on to protect students who didn't possess the political connections to protect themselves. Maya also considered the broader implications of allowing Derek's behavior to continue unchallenged. His willingness to publicly humiliate someone who had done nothing to provoke him suggested a pattern of conduct that likely extended to other students who lacked the visibility or social connections to report mistreatment effectively. By targeting her, Derek was demonstrating a methodology that he could apply to anyone who failed to show appropriate deference to his perceived authority. The philosophical frameworks that governed Maya's martial arts practice included the concept of protecting those who couldn't protect themselves, even when doing so required personal sacrifice or risk. Her grandfather had often told stories about situations where individuals with the capability to intervene chose instead to remain passive, allowing injustice to flourish through their inaction. The responsibility that came with possessing martial arts skills extended beyond personal defense to include the defense of others who faced similar threats. Maya felt her stance subtly shift as her body automatically prepared for the possibility of physical action. The adjustment was so slight that casual observers wouldn't have noticed, but her weight distribution changed to favor her dominant foot, her center of gravity lowered almost imperceptibly, and her hands relaxed into the neutral position that would allow for the fastest possible response to aggressive movement. The crowd had grown larger as word spread through the hallway that some sort of confrontation was developing. Students emerged from classrooms, abandoned conversations with friends, and detoured from their planned routes to witness whatever drama was unfolding. The audience now included representatives from most of Westfield Academy's major social groups, creating a cross-section of the student body that would ensure widespread dissemination of whatever occurred next. Maya noticed several students who appeared uncomfortable with the situation but seemed uncertain about how to intervene effectively. Their body language suggested sympathy for her predicament, but their positions on the periphery of the crowd indicated reluctance to challenge Derek's behavior directly. She recognized the complex social calculations that made intervention risky for students who hadn't yet established their own positions within the school's hierarchy. She also observed a smaller group of students who seemed genuinely entertained by her predicament, their expressions reflecting the kind of casual cruelty that flourished in environments where empathy was viewed as weakness. These students had likely participated in or witnessed similar incidents throughout their academic careers, developing a callousness that allowed them to view other people's suffering as legitimate entertainment. Derek seemed energized by the growing audience, his performance becoming more elaborate as he recognized the social capital he was earning through his demonstration of dominance. He began incorporating elements of physical comedy into his routine, pretending to struggle with the concept of how glasses worked, while making exaggerated facial expressions that sent waves of laughter through the crowd. "Maybe we should get her some contact lenses," Marcus suggested, his comment eliciting additional laughter from students who appreciated the implication that Maya's current predicament was somehow her own fault for choosing to wear glasses in the first place. The suggestion also carried undertones about economic status, implying that her family couldn't afford what many students considered a more socially acceptable form of vision correction. Maya felt her patience reach its absolute limit, as Derek made an elaborate show of cleaning her glasses with a dirty cloth that he had retrieved from his backpack. The gesture was obviously intended to damage or soil the lenses, transforming what had begun as theft into deliberate destruction of property. The escalation represented a clear statement that Derek's intentions had moved beyond temporary humiliation toward causing permanent harm. "Last chance," Maya said quietly, her voice carrying a tone that several students in the crowd would later describe as completely different from her previous attempts at communication. The words weren't spoken loudly, but they seemed to cut through the ambient noise of the hallway with unusual clarity. "Give me my glasses back right now." Derek's response was to hold the glasses high above his head while making kissing sounds that were clearly intended to mock what he perceived as Maya's powerless rage. "Or what?" he challenged, his voice filled with the confidence of someone who had never faced serious consequences for his actions. "What are you going to do about it, Four Eyes?" Maya Chen looked up at her glasses, held tantalizingly out of reach by someone who had mistaken her restraint for weakness, her commitment to peaceful resolution for inability to defend herself. She thought about her grandfather's stories of facing discrimination and violence with dignity, but also with the courage to stand up when standing up became necessary. She remembered Master Tanaka's teachings about the responsibility that came with martial arts training, the obligation to protect not just oneself but the principles of respect and mutual welfare that made civilized society possible. Most importantly, she recognized that some lessons could only be taught through demonstration, that some people would never understand the importance of treating others with basic human dignity until they experienced firsthand the consequences of their cruelty. The crowd sensed that something had shifted in the dynamics of the confrontation, though most couldn't identify exactly what had changed. Maya's posture remained relaxed, her expression calm, but something in her eyes had transformed from resignation to resolution. Students who had been laughing moments earlier felt an unexpected tension settling over the hallway, as if the very air had become charged with potential energy. Derek, focused on maintaining his performance for the crowd, missed the subtle signs that indicated his victim was no longer quite as helpless as she appeared. He continued waving the glasses above his head, completely unaware that he was about to receive an education in the difference between actual strength and the mere appearance of power. Maya took one more deep breath, centered her awareness in the way that years of training had made automatic, and prepared to demonstrate that quiet people weren't necessarily weak people, that restraint shouldn't be mistaken for inability, and that sometimes the most powerful response to aggression was showing the aggressor exactly how much power they had been dealing with all along. The moment of decision had arrived, and Maya Chen was ready to show Westfield Academy that appearances could be very, very deceiving. Maya's world crystallized into sharp focus, despite the absence of her glasses. Years of training had taught her to rely on more than just visual input, and her other senses compensated with remarkable precision. She could hear Derek's breathing, slightly elevated from excitement and the physical exertion of holding her glasses above his head. She could smell the cheap cologne that clung to his football jersey, mixed with the lingering odor of whatever protein shake he had consumed between classes. Most importantly, she could sense his positioning through the subtle vibrations in the floor and the way his voice projected from a specific point in space. The crowd had grown restless, their initial entertainment beginning to fade as the confrontation stretched longer than the typical hallway incident. Some students were checking their phones, calculating how much time remained before their next class, while others began to lose interest in what they perceived as a one-sided humiliation that offered diminishing returns on their investment of attention. The social media documentation continued, but with less enthusiasm than the first few minutes had generated. Maya recognized this shift in crowd dynamics as an opportunity. Derek's performance was losing its audience appeal, which meant he would need to escalate his behavior to maintain their engagement. Escalation was exactly what Maya had been waiting for, the moment when his actions would cross from mere harassment into territory that justified a physical response according to the principles her sensei had drilled into her consciousness. "I'm getting bored," announced Jessica Walsh, one of the more influential junior girls whose opinion carried significant weight among her peer group. "This is just sad now. Can't you do something more interesting?" Derek's face flushed slightly at the implied criticism of his entertainment value. He had built his reputation on being unpredictably cruel, on finding new ways to humiliate students who couldn't fight back effectively. Jessica's comment suggested that his current approach was becoming predictable, which posed a direct threat to the social capital he had invested years in accumulating. "Oh, you want something more interesting?" Derek replied, his voice taking on an edge that Maya recognized as genuinely dangerous. "How about this?" He moved toward Maya with sudden aggression, closing the distance between them in 2 quick steps. His intention seemed to be physical intimidation, using his size advantage to make her cower or retreat. What he didn't anticipate was that Maya had been waiting for exactly this type of movement, had been calculating angles and distances while appearing helpless and disoriented. Maya's response was so swift and fluid that most observers initially missed what had happened. As Derek approached, she stepped slightly to her left while simultaneously reaching up with her right hand. The movement appeared to be another desperate attempt to retrieve her glasses, but the angle and timing were precisely calculated, based on principles of leverage and momentum, that Derek couldn't possibly have understood. Her hand contacted Derek's wrist just as his forward momentum reached its peak. Instead of grabbing or pulling, Maya used a technique called te guruma, a hand wheel throw that redirected his energy in a direction he wasn't prepared to handle. Her left foot swept behind his advancing leg while her right hand guided his arm in a circular motion that used his own forward movement to break his balance. Derek found himself suddenly airborne, his body rotating around an axis that seemed to have appeared from nowhere. The sensation was completely alien to someone accustomed to controlling physical confrontations through brute strength and intimidation. One moment he had been advancing confidently toward what he perceived as an easy target, and the next he was experiencing the helpless terror of falling through space with no ability to control his landing. Maya's training had emphasized the importance of controlling an opponent's descent to minimize injury while still neutralizing their threat. As Derek's body completed its rotation, she maintained contact with his arm, using precise timing to ensure that he landed on his back rather than in a position that might cause serious harm. The throw was executed with a kind of technical perfection that would have impressed Master Tanaka, demonstrating both physical skill and the emotional control necessary to use exactly the amount of force required without exceeding it. Derek hit the linoleum floor with an impact that knocked the wind from his lungs and sent Maya's glasses skittering across the hallway. The sound echoed off the walls like a gunshot, instantly transforming the atmosphere from casual entertainment to shocked silence. Students who had been laughing moments earlier now stared in disbelief at the sight of Derek Morrison, Westfield Academy's most feared bully. Lying flat on his back and struggling to breathe, Maya moved immediately to retrieve her glasses, her vision gradually returning to normal as she slipped the familiar frames back onto her face. The world snapped back into sharp focus, revealing the circle of stunned faces that surrounded her. Some students had their phones raised, still recording, but their expressions suggested they were capturing something entirely different from what they had expected to document. Derek rolled onto his side, coughing and gasping as he tried to force air back into his lungs. The fall had been startling rather than seriously damaging, but his pride had suffered a blow that was far more devastating than any physical injury. He looked up at Maya with a mixture of confusion and rage, unable to process how someone he had categorized as helpless had just demonstrated such overwhelming physical superiority. "What the hell?" Derek wheezed, his voice strained and lacking the confidence that had characterized his earlier taunts. "How did you do that?" Maya stood over him, her posture relaxed but alert, ready to respond if he chose to continue the confrontation. Her expression remained calm, showing neither anger nor satisfaction, only the kind of focused awareness that her training had ingrained as the appropriate mindset for managing potentially dangerous situations. "I asked you politely to return my glasses," Maya said, her voice carrying easily through the silent hallway. "You chose to escalate the situation into something physical. I simply responded appropriately to protect myself and recover my property." Marcus Webb, who had been frozen in shock since watching his friend suddenly transform from aggressor to victim, finally found his voice. "You can't just attack people," he shouted, though his positioning several feet away from Maya suggested he had no intention of testing her capabilities personally. "I didn't attack anyone," Maya replied calmly, adjusting her glasses with steady hands. "Derek approached me aggressively after stealing my personal property and refusing to return it despite multiple polite requests. What you witnessed was self-defense, nothing more." The crowd began to murmur as students processed what they had seen and tried to reconcile it with their preconceptions about both Maya and Derek. Several conversations started simultaneously, creating a low buzz of speculation and amazement that filled the corridor with nervous energy. "Did you see how fast that was? I didn't even see her move. Where did she learn to do that? Derek's gonna be so pissed when he gets up. I can't believe the quiet girl just destroyed Derek Morrison." Maya ignored the commentary, focusing instead on assessing whether the immediate threat had been neutralized. Derek was clearly shaken, but not seriously injured, and his body language suggested he was more focused on recovering his dignity than on continuing the physical confrontation. Marcus remained at a safe distance, his earlier bravado replaced by obvious uncertainty about how to proceed. Derek struggled to his feet, his movements careful and deliberate, as he tested for any lasting effects from his unexpected encounter with the floor. His face was flushed with embarrassment and anger, But Maya could see him calculating his options as he realized that his usual methods of intimidation might not be effective against someone with her capabilities. "This isn't over," Derek said, his voice attempting to project menace but betraying an underlying uncertainty that several students in the crowd immediately noticed. "You got lucky, but next time will be different." Maya felt a flicker of disappointment at his response. She had hoped that demonstrating her ability to defend herself might lead Derek to reconsider his approach to conflict resolution, perhaps encouraging him to reflect on the wisdom of targeting people he perceived as vulnerable. Instead, his reaction suggested that he viewed their encounter as a temporary setback rather than a learning opportunity. "There doesn't need to be a next time," Maya replied, her tone remaining respectful despite Derek's obvious hostility. "I have no interest in fighting with you or anyone else. I just want to attend classes, complete my education, and be left alone to pursue my academic goals." Her reasonable response seemed to frustrate Derek even more than an aggressive challenge might have. Students who bullied others typically expected either cowering submission or angry retaliation, both of which provided opportunities for further escalation. Maya's calm professionalism offered neither satisfaction nor clear targets for additional harassment. The sound of adult voices approaching from the main office corridor caused an immediate shift in crowd dynamics. Students began dispersing with the practiced efficiency of those accustomed to avoiding administrative attention when witnessing potentially controversial incidents. Phones disappeared into pockets and backpacks, conversations shifted to apparently innocent topics, and the dense circle around Maya and Derek transformed into a normal pattern of hallway traffic. Mrs. Patterson, the vice principal responsible for student discipline, rounded the corner accompanied by Mr. Thompson, the head of school security. Their expressions suggested they had received reports of some sort of disturbance but weren't entirely certain what they might find upon investigation. "What's going on here?" Mrs. Patterson asked, her voice carrying the authoritative tone of someone accustomed to extracting truth from reluctant teenagers. Her eyes moved systematically between Maya, Derek, and Marcus, noting Derek's disheveled appearance and the subtle tension that lingered in the air despite the crowd's dispersal. Derek opened his mouth to speak, but Maya stepped forward first, recognizing that controlling the narrative might be crucial for ensuring an accurate representation of events. "There was a misunderstanding about my glasses," Maya said, her voice steady and respectful. Derek accidentally knocked them off, and in the process of retrieving them, he lost his balance and fell. "I wanted to make sure he wasn't injured before continuing to my next class." Maya's version of events was technically accurate, while avoiding details that might escalate the situation unnecessarily. Her phrasing suggested concern for Derek's welfare rather than pride in her defensive capabilities, demonstrating the kind of mature perspective that adults appreciated when dealing with student conflicts. Derek's expression suggested he wanted to dispute Maya's characterization, but the presence of authority figures and the potential consequences of admitting to harassment gave him pause. His reputation with the administration was already somewhat tenuous due to previous incidents, and openly contradicting a version of events that portrayed him as clumsy rather than aggressive might not serve his best interests. Mrs. Patterson studied both students carefully, her experience allowing her to sense undercurrents that the sanitized explanation didn't fully address. "Derek, are you injured? Do you need to visit the nurse?" "No, I'm fine," Derek replied through gritted teeth, his pride preventing him from admitting to any lasting effects from his encounter with the floor. "Just lost my balance for a second." "Maya, are your glasses damaged?" Mrs. Patterson continued, her questioning methodical and professional. Maya removed her glasses and examined them carefully under the hallway lighting. "They appear to be undamaged," she replied, though she made a mental note to check the alignment more carefully when she had access to better lighting and a mirror. Mr. Thompson had been observing the crowd dynamics during the conversation, noting which students seemed reluctant to make eye contact and which appeared eager to leave the area. His security background had taught him to read the subtle signs that indicated when official reports might not capture the complete truth of an incident. "I'd like to speak with both of you in my office," Mrs. Patterson announced, her tone suggesting that the invitation wasn't optional. "Just to make sure we have a complete understanding of what happened and to ensure that any similar misunderstandings can be avoided in the future." Maya nodded politely, recognizing that cooperation with administrative investigations was both required and strategically wise. Derek's agreement was less enthusiastic, but he understood that refusing to participate would likely result in more serious consequences than whatever might emerge from a routine disciplinary interview. As they walked toward the administrative offices, Maya noticed students whispering and pointing in their direction. Word of Derek's unexpected encounter with the floor was already spreading through the school's informal communication networks, gaining embellishments and interpretations that would likely transform the incident into something far more dramatic than what had actually occurred. The vice principal's office was decorated with motivational posters and academic achievement awards, creating an atmosphere that was simultaneously authoritative and supportive. Mrs. Patterson gestured for Maya and Derek to take seats in the chairs positioned across from her desk, then settled herself with the kind of deliberate composure that suggested years of experience managing student conflicts. "I want both of you to understand that my primary concern is ensuring a safe learning environment for all students," Mrs. Patterson began, her voice professional but not unkind. "Sometimes accidents happen, and sometimes misunderstandings escalate beyond what anyone intended. My job is to determine which situation we're dealing with and to ensure that similar incidents don't occur in the future." Maya maintained eye contact and an attentive posture, recognizing that her behavior during this interview might significantly influence how the administration perceived both her character and her version of events. Derek slouched slightly in his chair, his body language suggesting resentment at being subjected to questioning about what he probably viewed as a minor hallway incident. "Maya, since you're new to Westfield Academy, let me explain our policies regarding physical contact between students," Mrs. Patterson continued. "Our handbook clearly states that any physical altercation, regardless of who initiates it or what circumstances lead to it, is taken very seriously. Students involved in fighting face automatic suspension and possible disciplinary action that could affect their academic standing." The warning was delivered with the kind of measured emphasis that indicated Mrs. Patterson had given similar speeches countless times throughout her administrative career. Maya understood that she was being informed about potential consequences, while simultaneously being given an opportunity to clarify her role in the incident. "I understand the policy completely," Maya replied, her voice reflecting both respect for the rules and confidence in her own actions. "I want to emphasize that I had no intention of engaging in any kind of physical confrontation. My only goal was to retrieve my glasses and continue to my next class without further incident." Derek shifted uncomfortably in his chair, recognizing that Maya's careful phrasing placed the burden of explaining any aggressive behavior squarely on his shoulders. His options were limited to either accepting her version of events or providing an alternative explanation that might expose him to more serious disciplinary consequences. Mrs. Patterson turned her attention to Derek, her expression neutral but expectant. "Derek, can you walk me through your perspective on what happened? I'm particularly interested in understanding how Maya's glasses became separated from her face, and why you were involved in the process of retrieving them." The question was precisely crafted to elicit information about Derek's role without making assumptions about his intentions or actions. Maya recognized the interrogation technique and felt a grudging respect for Mrs. Patterson's skill in managing potentially explosive situations. Derek hesitated, clearly calculating the risks and benefits of various possible responses. His previous encounters with the disciplinary system had taught him that admitting to intentional harassment typically resulted in more severe consequences than claiming accidents or misunderstandings. "It was just a joke that got out of hand," Derek finally said, his voice lacking conviction. "I was messing around with her glasses, and when she tried to get them back, we both got tangled up and I tripped. No big deal." Maya noted that Derek's explanation contradicted several key details of what had actually occurred, but she chose not to correct him immediately. Mrs. Patterson's experience with student disciplinary issues meant she was likely capable of identifying inconsistencies without assistance from the involved parties. "I see," Mrs. Patterson replied, her tone suggesting neither acceptance nor rejection of Derek's characterization. "And Maya, does Derek's description match your recollection of events?" Maya considered her response carefully, recognizing that this moment might determine how the administration viewed both her credibility and her approach to conflict resolution. Her answer needed to be honest without being unnecessarily confrontational, accurate, without providing details that might escalate the situation beyond what was required for administrative purposes. "Derek's description captures some elements of what happened," Maya said diplomatically. "I would add that the situation lasted longer than he might remember, and that I made several requests for him to return my glasses before the physical contact occurred. I think we both learned something about the importance of clear communication and respect for other people's property. Her response demonstrated maturity and a willingness to view the incident as a learning opportunity rather than a victory to be celebrated. Mrs. Patterson nodded approvingly, recognizing the kind of perspective that indicated genuine character development rather than mere diplomatic positioning. Derek, do you have anything to add about Maya's observations regarding the duration of the incident or her requests for the return of her glasses? Mrs. Patterson asked, giving him an opportunity to either confirm Maya's version or provide additional details that might affect her assessment of the situation. Derek's internal struggle was visible in his facial expressions as he weighed the implications of various possible responses. Confirming Maya's account might make him appear more culpable for initiating the conflict, but contradicting her might require him to provide details that could expose him to more serious disciplinary consequences. Maybe it went on a little longer than I thought, Derek admitted reluctantly, and maybe she did ask for them back a couple times. But it was still just joking around that got out of hand. Mrs. Patterson made notes on a form that Maya couldn't see from her position, but the administrator's body language suggested she was documenting details that might be relevant for future reference. The interview process was clearly following established protocols designed to create an official record while giving students opportunities to explain their perspectives. Maya, given that this is your first week at Westfield Academy, I want to make sure you understand our expectations regarding how students should handle conflicts, Mrs. Patterson said, her tone shifting to one of guidance rather than investigation. If you feel threatened or harassed by another student, our policy is to immediately report the situation to a teacher, counselor, or administrator, rather than attempting to resolve it independently. The advice was sound from an institutional perspective, but Maya recognized the practical limitations of relying exclusively on adult intervention in situations that developed rapidly and required immediate response. Her training had taught her to exhaust peaceful options before resorting to physical techniques, but it had also emphasized the importance of protecting herself when other methods proved inadequate. I appreciate the guidance, Maya replied respectfully. In this situation, there weren't any adults immediately available, and I felt that my first priority should be protecting my ability to participate in my afternoon classes. Without my glasses, I can't see the board or read my textbooks effectively. Her explanation framed her actions in terms of academic necessity rather than personal pride or aggressive retaliation. Mrs. Patterson seemed to appreciate this perspective, recognizing that Maya's primary concern had been educational rather than social or emotional. Derek's discomfort with the direction of the conversation was becoming increasingly apparent. The administrative process was clearly positioning him as the instigator of an incident that had resulted in his own humiliation, while Maya emerged as a responsible student who had responded reasonably to an unreasonable situation. Derek, our school handbook is very clear about respecting other students' personal property and personal space, Mrs. Patterson continued, her tone becoming more serious. Taking someone's glasses, even as a joke, creates a safety hazard and prevents them from participating fully in their educational activities. This kind of behavior doesn't align with Westfield Academy's values or expectations for student conduct. The formal warning was delivered with the kind of measured authority that indicated Derek was receiving an official reprimand that would become part of his disciplinary record. Maya recognized that Mrs. Patterson was establishing clear consequences for Derek's behavior, while simultaneously demonstrating to Maya that the administration took harassment seriously. Derek's face flushed with embarrassment and anger, but he managed to nod his understanding rather than arguing with the assessment. His previous experience with disciplinary procedures had taught him that challenging administrative decisions typically resulted in escalated consequences rather than favorable reconsideration. Maya, while I understand your motivation for retrieving your glasses independently, I want to encourage you to seek adult assistance in similar situations going forward, Mrs. Patterson said, her tone returning to one of guidance. Our teachers and staff are trained to handle conflicts effectively, and involving them helps ensure that situations don't escalate unnecessarily. Maya nodded politely, though she privately maintained some skepticism about the administration's ability to respond quickly enough to prevent harassment from occurring. Her experience at previous schools had taught her that institutional policies often prioritized liability management over effective protection of individual students. I'll certainly keep that in mind for any future situations, Maya replied diplomatically. I hope that my presence at Westfield Academy won't create any additional conflicts that would require administrative intervention. Her response subtly emphasized that she viewed herself as a victim of harassment rather than a participant in mutual combat, while also expressing hope that future interactions with Derek and other students would be more positive. Mrs. Patterson seemed to appreciate both the maturity of Maya's perspective and her commitment to avoiding further incidents. The interview concluded with Mrs. Patterson providing both students with copies of the relevant sections of the student handbook and scheduling follow-up meetings to ensure that the conflict had been fully resolved. Derek was assigned to write a reflection paper about respect for other students' property and personal space, while Maya was asked to attend a brief session with the school counselor to discuss strategies for reporting harassment and building positive relationships with her new classmates. As they left the administrative office, Derek and Maya found themselves walking in the same direction toward their respective afternoon classes. The hallway had returned to normal activity patterns, but Maya noticed students glancing in their direction and whispering conversations that suggested news of their encounter had spread throughout the school community. Derek's body language remained tense and hostile, but he made no attempt to resume their conflict or to issue additional threats. Maya interpreted his restraint as evidence that their physical encounter had provided him with new information about the potential consequences of targeting her for harassment. "This isn't finished," Derek muttered as they approached the intersection where their paths would diverge toward different classroom areas. Maya stopped and turned to face him directly, her expression serious but not threatening. "It doesn't have to continue either," she replied calmly. "I have no interest in fighting with you or anyone else. I'm here to get an education and help my family build a better future. If you leave me alone, I'll leave you alone." Her offer was straightforward and reasonable, providing Derek with a clear path toward avoiding future conflicts while maintaining his dignity. The choice of whether to accept her terms or escalate their antagonism would reveal important information about his character and his commitment to the lessons the administrative intervention was intended to provide. Derek stared at her for a long moment, his internal struggle visible in his facial expressions. The rational part of his mind recognized that continuing to target Maya would likely result in additional humiliation and potentially serious disciplinary consequences. However, his pride and his reputation among his peer group created pressure to respond aggressively to what he perceived as a challenge to his authority. "We'll see," Derek finally said, his tone suggesting that he was reserving the right to resume hostilities while not committing to any specific course of action. Maya nodded acknowledgement of his response and continued toward her afternoon classes, recognizing that Derek's ambiguous threat represented the best outcome she could reasonably expect from their current conversation. The immediate crisis had been resolved, and the administrative intervention had established clear consequences for future harassment. As she walked through the corridors of Westfield Academy, Maya reflected on the events of the morning and their potential implications for her remaining time at the school. Her demonstration of self-defense capabilities had certainly achieved the immediate goal of recovering her glasses and ending Derek's harassment, but it had also revealed information about her background that she had hoped to keep private. The attention she was receiving from other students was already beginning to feel uncomfortable. Maya had chosen to maintain a low profile during her transition to Westfield Academy, specifically to avoid the complications that came with standing out from the crowd. Her martial arts training was something she had planned to keep private, using it only if absolutely necessary, and hoping that her academic focus would be sufficient to navigate the social complexities of her new environment. The irony of her situation wasn't lost on her. In defending herself against harassment, she had inadvertently created exactly the kind of visibility she had been working to avoid. Students who had never noticed her before were now aware of her presence and curious about her background. Teachers who had viewed her as a quiet, studious newcomer might now see her as someone with a potential for conflict. Maya's afternoon classes passed in a blur of whispered conversations and curious stares. Word of Derek's unexpected encounter with the hallway floor had spread throughout the school with the efficiency that characterized teenage communication networks. Each retelling of the story seemed to gain additional dramatic elements, transforming what had been a brief defensive technique into increasingly elaborate descriptions of martial arts prowess. By the time she reached her final class of the day, Advanced Biology with Dr. Martinez, Maya had overheard at least 6 different versions of the morning's events. Some accounts portrayed her as a secret martial arts master who had been hiding her capabilities while studying her potential victims. Others suggested she was a transfer student with a history of violence who had been expelled from her previous school for fighting. The most persistent rumor, which seemed to be gaining credibility through repetition, claimed that she had deliberately provoked Derek into confronting her so that she could demonstrate her fighting skills to establish dominance over the school's social hierarchy. This interpretation particularly frustrated Maya because it contradicted everything she believed about appropriate use of martial arts and her own motivations for defending herself. Dr. Martinez, a veteran teacher with over 20 years of experience managing adolescent dynamics, seemed to sense the undercurrent of excitement that Maya's presence was generating among her students. Rather than addressing the situation directly, she chose to channel the class's energy into productive academic activity by announcing a surprise laboratory exercise that would require intense focus and collaboration. The distraction was exactly what Maya needed to restore some sense of normalcy to her day. The familiar rhythms of scientific observation and analysis provided a welcome refuge from the social complications that her morning encounter had created. She threw herself into the lab work with enthusiasm, grateful for an activity that allowed her to demonstrate her capabilities in an area where she felt confident and comfortable. Her lab partner, a quiet senior named Alex Richardson, seemed genuinely interested in Maya's approach to the experimental procedures rather than in her newfound reputation as someone capable of surprising Derek Morrison. Their collaboration was productive and pleasant, focusing on the scientific concepts they were exploring, rather than on the social drama that had dominated the rest of Maya's day. "You're really good at this," Alex observed, as Maya completed a particularly complex measurement with impressive precision. "Are you planning to study science in college?" The question was refreshingly normal, representing the kind of academic conversation that Maya had hoped would characterize her experience at Westfield Academy. She felt some of the tension that had been building throughout the day begin to dissolve as she discussed her interests in biomedical engineering and her long-term career goals. "I'm hoping to get into a program that combines engineering with medical applications," Maya replied, her voice reflecting genuine enthusiasm for the subject matter. "I'm particularly interested in developing assistive technologies that could help people with visual impairments navigate their environment more effectively." Alex's eyebrows rose with interest. "That's really cool. Have you done any projects in that area?" Maya found herself describing a prototype navigation device she had designed for her previous school's science fair, a project that had grown out of her own experiences with temporary vision impairment during martial arts training exercises. The conversation flowed naturally, allowing her to share her intellectual interests without the self-consciousness that had characterized her interactions with other students throughout the day. Dr. Martinez, who had been circulating among the lab groups to monitor their progress, paused near Maya and Alex's station to observe their work. Her expression suggested approval of both their experimental technique and their collaborative approach to problem-solving. "Maya, Alex tells me you've done some interesting work with assistive technology design," Dr. Martinez said, her tone reflecting genuine professional interest. "I'd be curious to hear more about your projects if you'd be willing to share them with the class sometime." The invitation represented exactly the kind of academic recognition that Maya valued, an opportunity to contribute to her new school community through her intellectual abilities rather than through social drama or physical confrontations. She felt a surge of gratitude toward Dr. Martinez for creating space for her to demonstrate her capabilities in a constructive context. "I'd be happy to present my work," Maya replied, her enthusiasm evident in her voice. "I brought documentation of several projects with me when my family moved, and I'd love to get feedback from other students who might be interested in similar research." The remainder of the class period passed quickly as Maya and Alex completed their laboratory exercise and began discussing possibilities for collaborative projects that might combine their respective interests in biological systems and technological applications. The academic focus provided a welcome respite from the social complications that had dominated Maya's morning, reminding her of the educational opportunities that had motivated her family's move to Millbrook. As students began packing their materials at the end of class, Dr. Martinez approached Maya's station with a thoughtful expression. "Maya, I wanted to let you know that I'm always available if you need someone to talk to about adjusting to Westfield Academy," she said quietly. "Transitioning to a new school can be challenging, and I want to make sure you have the support you need to succeed academically." The offer was clearly motivated by more than routine concern for a new student's academic adjustment. Dr. Martinez had likely heard about the morning's incident and was extending an invitation for Maya to discuss any concerns about her social integration or safety at the school. "Thank you, Dr. Martinez," Maya replied gratefully. "I really appreciate your willingness to help, and I'll definitely reach out if I need guidance or support." As Maya gathered her materials and prepared to leave the classroom, she felt a renewed sense of optimism about her potential to build positive relationships at Westfield Academy. Dr. Martinez's professional interest in her academic work and Alex's collaborative approach to their lab partnership suggested that there were opportunities to connect with people who valued intellectual curiosity and personal growth over social drama and conflict. The hallway outside the biology classroom was less crowded than the main corridors, allowing Maya to walk toward her locker without attracting the curious stares that had followed her throughout the day. The relative privacy gave her an opportunity to reflect on the events of the past few hours and to consider how she might navigate the social landscape that her morning encounter with Derek had created. Maya's phone buzzed with a text message from her mother, asking about her day and reminding her about their dinner plans to celebrate her successful first week at Westfield Academy. The irony of the timing wasn't lost on Maya, who had indeed successfully completed her first week, though not in the quiet, unremarkable manner she had originally envisioned. The decision about how much to share with her parents about the day's events would require careful consideration. Maya's mother had been anxious about the transition to a new school, particularly given their family's previous experiences with social integration challenges. Learning that Maya had been involved in any kind of physical altercation, even in self-defense, might cause unnecessary worry and potentially lead to protective interventions that could complicate her social situation further. On the other hand, Maya recognized the importance of maintaining honest communication with her parents, particularly about situations that might affect her safety or academic performance. Her father's engineering background had taught him to approach problems systematically, and his perspective might prove valuable in developing strategies for managing any ongoing challenges with Derek or other students. As Maya reached her locker and began organizing her materials for the evening's homework assignments, she noticed a small group of students gathered near the main exit, their conversation animated and their body language suggesting they were discussing something particularly interesting. The timing and their positioning suggested they might be waiting to observe her departure from the building, perhaps hoping to witness additional drama or to gather more details about her background. Maya decided to use an alternative exit route that would allow her to avoid the gathering crowd while still maintaining her normal routine. The decision reflected the kind of tactical thinking that her martial arts training had encouraged, recognizing potential problems early and taking simple steps to avoid unnecessary complications. The walk home through Millbrook's quiet residential neighborhoods provided Maya with an opportunity to decompress from the intensity of her day and to process the various emotions that her encounter with Derek had generated. She felt satisfaction at having successfully defended herself and recovered her property, but also concern about the potential long-term consequences of having revealed her martial arts capabilities. The afternoon air was crisp and clear, carrying the scent of autumn leaves and the distant sound of children playing in nearby parks. The normalcy of the suburban environment provided a stark contrast to the social tensions that had dominated her experience at Westfield Academy, reminding her that the conflicts she had faced represented only a small portion of her overall life experience. Maya's reflection on the day's events led her to a deeper appreciation for the philosophical foundations that governed her martial arts practice. Master Tanaka had often emphasized that judo was not simply a collection of physical techniques but a comprehensive approach to living that emphasized respect, discipline, and the careful consideration of consequences before taking action. Her decision to use a defensive technique against Derek had been motivated by immediate necessity rather than anger or desire for revenge. The throw she had executed had been precisely calibrated to neutralize his threat while minimizing the risk of serious injury, demonstrating the kind of controlled response that her training had been designed to develop. More importantly, Maya recognized that her encounter with Derek represented an opportunity to demonstrate that martial arts could be used responsibly and ethically, even in challenging social situations. Her restraint in limiting her response to exactly what was necessary, combined with her cooperative approach to the administrative investigation, had shown that physical capabilities could coexist with intellectual maturity and respect for institutional authority. As Maya approached her family's rental house, she could see her mother's car in the driveway and lights glowing warmly in the kitchen windows. The sight filled her with gratitude for the stability and support that her family provided, particularly during periods of transition and uncertainty. The evening ahead would provide an opportunity to share her experiences with parents who understood the challenges of building new lives in unfamiliar environments. Their perspective and guidance would help her develop strategies for navigating the social complexities that her first week at Westfield Academy had revealed, while maintaining focus on the academic and personal goals that had motivated their family's move to Millbrook. Maya paused on the front porch, taking a moment to appreciate the sense of home and belonging that her family had created, despite the challenges of relocation and adjustment. Tomorrow would bring new opportunities and potential challenges, but tonight, she could rest in the knowledge that she had successfully defended her principles, while maintaining her commitment to the values that her martial arts training had instilled. 3 weeks had passed since Maya's encounter with Derek, and Westfield Academy felt like an entirely different place. The shift hadn't happened overnight, but gradually, like watching seasons change through a window. Students who had once hurried past potential conflicts now paused to intervene when they witnessed harassment. Teachers found themselves dealing with fewer disciplinary issues, as word spread that standing up for yourself or others wasn't just acceptable, but admirable. Maya discovered her transformation from invisible newcomer to reluctant school legend during lunch period when Emma Rodriguez, a sophomore she had never spoken to, approached her table carrying a petition. "Maya, we're starting an anti-bullying club and wondered if you'd consider being our advisor," Emma said, her voice trembling slightly with nervous excitement. "After what you did to Derek, everyone realizes we don't have to just take it when people pick on us." The petition bore 47 signatures from students across all grade levels, representing a cross-section of Westfield Academy's population that Maya hadn't realized was paying attention to her actions. Names she recognized from various classes appeared alongside others she had never encountered, united by a shared desire to create positive change in their school environment. Maya studied the document carefully, recognizing the significance of what Emma and her fellow organizers were proposing. The club would provide structured support for students facing harassment, while promoting conflict resolution skills and peer mediation techniques. The goals aligned perfectly with the principles her martial arts training had instilled, emphasizing protection of vulnerable community members through collective action rather than individual confrontation. "I'm honored that you thought of me," Maya replied thoughtfully. "But I think this club would be more effective with student leadership rather than having an outsider like me in a prominent role. What if I participated as a regular member while you and the other organizers took the official positions?" Emma's face lit up with relief and gratitude. The suggestion demonstrated exactly the kind of collaborative approach that would make the club successful, while allowing Maya to contribute without becoming the focal point of attention she preferred to avoid. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Alex Richardson, who had become Maya's closest friend at Westfield Academy through their shared laboratory work and similar academic interests. Alex carried news that Derek Morrison had been accepted to a military prep school in another state and would be transferring immediately after winter break. Apparently, his parents decided he needed more structure and discipline, Alex explained, settling into the chair across from Maya. "The official story is that it's a great academic opportunity, but everyone knows it's really about getting him away from here before he causes more problems." Maya felt a complex mixture of relief and disappointment at the news. Derek's departure would eliminate the ongoing tension that had colored her daily experience at Westfield Academy, but it also represented a missed opportunity for genuine conflict resolution and personal growth. She had hoped that their encounter might eventually lead Derek to reconsider his approach to interpersonal relationships, perhaps developing empathy for students he had previously viewed as acceptable targets. The announcement of Derek's transfer had immediate effects on the school's social dynamics. Students who had been walking on eggshells around him began expressing themselves more freely in hallways and classrooms. Marcus Webb, Derek's former lieutenant, found himself isolated, as other students refused to enable his attempts to maintain the intimidation tactics that had characterized their partnership. Maya observed these changes with fascination, recognizing how quickly established power structures could shift when key participants were removed or marginalized. Her single moment of self-defense had created ripple effects that extended far beyond her individual circumstances, demonstrating the interconnected nature of social systems and the potential for positive change when people refuse to accept unacceptable behavior. Dr. Martinez approached Maya after advanced biology class with an unexpected proposal that would further expand her influence within the school community. "Maya, I've been impressed by your laboratory work and your approach to collaborative problem solving," Dr. Martinez began, her tone suggesting this was more than routine teacher feedback. "I am organizing a peer tutoring program for students who are struggling with science concepts, and I'd like you to consider participating as a mentor." The invitation represented exactly the kind of academic leadership opportunity that Maya valued, allowing her to contribute to her school community through her intellectual strengths rather than through the martial arts capabilities that had brought her unwanted attention. She accepted enthusiastically, recognizing that tutoring would provide structure for positive interactions with classmates while reinforcing her own understanding of scientific concepts. Maya's first tutoring session was with Jennifer Walsh, a junior who had been failing chemistry despite obvious intelligence and strong motivation to succeed. Jennifer's struggles stemmed from gaps in her mathematical background rather than inability to understand chemical principles, creating frustration that was affecting her confidence in all her academic subjects. "I just don't get why I need to know all this algebra stuff to understand how atoms work," Jennifer confessed during their initial meeting, her voice reflecting months of accumulated frustration. "It feels like they're making it harder than it needs to be." Maya recognized the disconnect between abstract mathematical concepts and their practical applications in scientific contexts, a common challenge for students who learned best through concrete examples and hands-on demonstration. She developed an approach that connected chemical equations to everyday phenomena that Jennifer could observe and understand intuitively. "Think of balancing chemical equations like following a recipe," Maya suggested, pulling out her notebook to sketch simple molecular diagrams. "You need the same number of each type of atom on both sides, just like you need the right proportions of ingredients to make cookies turn out correctly." The analogy resonated immediately with Jennifer, who had extensive experience with baking through her part-time job at a local cafe. Within an hour, she was successfully balancing complex equations that had frustrated her for weeks, her confidence growing with each successful calculation. Word of Maya's tutoring effectiveness spread quickly through the struggling students' network, leading to requests for assistance that exceeded her available time. She found herself coordinating with other academically successful students to expand the peer tutoring program into a comprehensive support system that addressed multiple subjects and learning styles. The tutoring program's success caught the attention of Principal Harrison, who invited Maya to participate in a district-wide conference on student leadership and academic achievement. The invitation recognized her contributions to improving Westfield Academy's academic culture while providing opportunities to share successful strategies with educators from other schools. Maya's presentation at the conference focused on the connection between social safety and academic performance, arguing that students could only achieve their intellectual potential when they felt secure from harassment and intimidation. Her research had revealed correlations between bullying incidents and declining grades among affected students, supporting the argument that anti-bullying initiatives were academic interventions rather than merely disciplinary measures. The presentation was well received by conference attendees, leading to invitations for Maya to consult with other schools that were developing their own peer support programs. The recognition validated her belief that positive change could be achieved through collaborative effort and systematic problem-solving rather than through individual confrontation or dramatic gestures. Meanwhile, the anti-bullying club that Emma Rodriguez had organized was gaining momentum and institutional support. The group met weekly to discuss conflict resolution strategies, plan awareness activities, and provide peer support for students facing harassment. Maya participated as a regular member, contributing her perspectives on effective communication and de-escalation techniques, without assuming a leadership role that might overshadow the student organizer's authority. The club's first major initiative was a school-wide assembly focused on bystander intervention training, teaching students how to safely interrupt harassment situations and provide support for targeted individuals. The program emphasized practical strategies that didn't require physical confrontation, recognizing that most students lacked Maya's martial arts background, but could still contribute to creating a safer school environment. Maya was asked to share her experience during the assembly, but she carefully framed her presentation around the importance of seeking help from adults and building supportive relationships, rather than focusing on the dramatic moment when she had defended herself against Derek. Her approach reinforced the message that effective conflict resolution typically involved community support rather than individual heroism. The assembly's impact was immediately visible in changed behavior throughout Westfield Academy. Students began intervening when they witnessed harassment, using techniques they had learned to interrupt conflicts before they escalated. Teachers reported fewer disciplinary issues, as the school culture shifted toward collective responsibility for maintaining respectful interactions. Alex Richardson had been documenting these changes for a journalism project, interviewing students and faculty about their perceptions of the school's evolving social climate. The data revealed significant improvements in student satisfaction, academic performance, and attendance rates since the beginning of the school year. It's like Maya throwing Derek created a permission structure for everyone else to stand up for themselves and each other, Alex explained during one of their laboratory sessions. People realized they didn't have to accept being treated badly, and more importantly, they didn't have to ignore it when they saw others being treated badly. Maya appreciated Alex's analysis while feeling somewhat uncomfortable with the focus on her individual actions rather than the collective efforts that had created lasting change. The anti-bullying club, the peer tutoring program, and the bystander intervention training represented collaborative achievements that extended far beyond any single person's contributions. Her perspective was reinforced during the school's winter assembly, where Principal Harrison announced that Westfield Academy had been selected as a model school for positive behavior interventions by the State Education Department. The recognition came with funding for expanded peer support programs and opportunities to share successful strategies with schools throughout the region. Maya listened to the announcement with mixed emotions, proud of her school community's achievements but aware that her family would be relocating again at the end of the academic year due to her father's career advancement. The knowledge that her time at Westfield Academy was limited made her more determined to ensure that the positive changes would continue after her departure. She began working with Emma Rodriguez and the other club organizers to develop sustainability plans that would maintain their program's effectiveness regardless of changes in student leadership or administrative priorities. The planning process involved creating detailed documentation of successful strategies, training protocols for new peer mentors, and evaluation systems for measuring ongoing program impact. Maya's final contribution to Westfield Academy came through a comprehensive manual she developed, documenting the school's transformation and providing practical guidance for other institutions seeking to implement similar changes. The manual combined research on effective anti-bullying strategies with specific examples from Westfield Academy's experience, creating a resource that could benefit students and educators far beyond her immediate school community. The manual's completion coincided with news of Derek Morrison's struggles at his new military prep school, where his attempts to establish dominance through intimidation had been met with swift and decisive disciplinary action. According to reports that filtered back through social media connections, Derek was receiving intensive counseling and behavior modification training designed to address the underlying issues that had driven his aggressive behavior. Maya found herself hoping that Derek's new environment would provide the structure and guidance necessary for genuine personal growth. Her martial arts training had taught her that even destructive behavior patterns could be transformed through appropriate intervention and sincere commitment to change. As her senior year at Westfield Academy drew to a close, Maya reflected on the unexpected trajectory her high school experience had taken. Her single moment of self-defense had catalyzed changes that extended far beyond her individual circumstances, demonstrating the potential for positive transformation when people refuse to accept unacceptable behavior. The lessons learned during her time at Westfield Academy would serve her well in college and beyond, reinforcing her commitment to using her skills and knowledge in service of others while maintaining the principles of respect and responsibility that governed her martial arts practice. Most importantly, she had discovered that true strength came not from the ability to defeat opponents, but from the courage to stand up for what was right and the wisdom to build lasting solutions rather than temporary victories. Maya's story at Westfield Academy concluded not with dramatic confrontation but with quiet satisfaction in knowing that she had contributed to creating an environment where future students would feel safer, more supported, and better equipped to handle the challenges of adolescent social dynamics. The real victory wasn't in throwing Derek Morrison to the ground, but in building a community where such dramatic interventions would no longer be necessary. Her legacy lived on in the peer tutoring program that continued helping struggling students achieve academic success, in the anti-bullying club that provided ongoing support for vulnerable community members, and in the countless individual relationships that had been strengthened through shared commitment to treating others with dignity and respect. These achievements represented the kind of lasting change that Maya valued most, transformations that would continue benefiting students long after she had moved on to her next adventure. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.